just want to thank the Thomas Metzinger and all the other organizers of this very interesting conference. And also Yiji, that was a fascinating presentation on Neo-Confucianism. I can see there's a lot of room for dialogue between Neo-Confucianism and Dzogchen, contemporary Dzogchen philosophy. So I hope we can have some forthcoming dialogue. My own presentation is on the Dzogchen understanding of what's known as Rigpa, or pure awareness. And from what I've heard this morning, I think there's also between neuroscience and Dzogchen thought a lot of room for a very productive dialogue. So I'll jump right in, and hopefully we'll have lots of time for questions afterwards. Just to lay out a bit of a game plan, I'm first going to talk about what is Dzogchen. If I was presenting on Zen or Theravada, I probably wouldn't need to do this, but Dzogchen's a little bit of a new kid on the block in the sense that it hasn't had as long of a history of recognition in the West. But that's changing in recent times with many teachers from Tibet who came during the latter part of the 20th century into exile and are now teaching. So I'll begin just by giving a short overview of that, then what the scope of Dzogchen thought and practice is. And I'll focus in particular on a key distinction between pure awareness, Rigpa, and dualistic mind, or sem or chitta in Sanskrit. I'll then drill down a bit and look at the nature and characteristics of each of these, mind and pure awareness. I'll look at how pure awareness devolves into ignorance. There's a complex understanding of how ignorance arises. And ignorance in Dzogchen thought is synonymous with dualistic mind and also with the alaya vijnana, the idea of a substratum consciousness. Then I'll look at how pure awareness is realized or disclosed. And finally, I'll touch briefly on the problem of the ground, because Rigpa is considered the ground of human existence. And I'll look at how it's distinguished from 7 metaphysical grounds, which are different perspectives on Rigpa that, if taken as absolutes, lead to a mistaken understanding. Finally, the nature of the primordial ground itself, and then concluding reflections. So Dzogchen is known as, or translated into English as great perfection, great completeness. The term Dzog means either completeness or perfection. And Chen is Maha in Sanskrit, means that than which there's nothing greater. So it's conveniently sort of translated just as great perfection. And it's basically the idea that all qualities of Buddhahood are already completely perfect within pure awareness. It's a tradition of esoteric, primarily tantric teachings in Indo-Tibetan Buddhism that aim at discovering and sustaining pure awareness, which is regarded as the ultimate ground of human existence. It first developed in Tibet during the royal dynastic period, 7th to 8th century, as a syncretistic tantric tradition that absorbed elements of Chinese Chan or Zen, and also certain Central Asian elements are clearly present as well in some of its philosophical thought. It continues to be practiced today in Tibet and also around the world because of, as I was saying, Tibetans in exile have sort of diffused and spread out and taught it in many parts of the world. Within the sort of broader context of Buddhist thought, it's regarded or sees itself as the 9th in a series of vehicles or yanas, which lead to liberation. And it's described as the effortless path of primordial knowing, the Yeshe Tsulme, and distinguished from the 8 effortful paths, Tsulche, of ordinary mind. It's, as I mentioned, regarded as the ground and goal of the Dzogchen path. And Longchenpa, who will be the main sort of guide that I'll refer to often in this talk, partly because he was a great synthesizer of Dzogchen thought in the 14th century. And this was a time of systematization and institutionalization of Tibetan Buddhism when masters were looking back on many centuries of doctrinal and doctrinal developments and trying to synthesize the findings in a coherent sort of path-like format. So Longchenpa defines this path of awakening, the Bodhi Marga, as the progressive disclosure of primordial knowing. Primordial knowing, Yeshe, is a quasi-synonymous with Rigpa. It's just another way of referring to this basic invariant mode of awareness. So he says, as the turbulence of mind and its mental factors come to rest, mind nature, or luminous primordial knowing, arises from within. We call the progressive familiarization with this primordial knowing the path of awakening. So Dzogchen philosophy of mind is inseparable from its distinctive soteriology. The goal is to articulate the conditions of non-dual experience so it can be personally realized by the practitioner. So by investigating the complex and heterogeneous structure of consciousness, the adept seeks to determine how afflictive thoughts and emotions arise and how they can best be relinquished to allow for the full recovery of latent capacities for unpremeditated altruistic modes of thought, feeling, and activity. So it's seen as kind of a way of recovering a more innate and more natural mode of being through the elimination of all that obscures it. And in this regard, this key distinction, which in Dzogchen is considered to be indispensable to understanding all of its thought and practice, is between pure awareness itself and conditioned dualistic mind. And it sort of developed an answer to the question, how do people become enlightened? What are the necessary conditions for humans to become what is known as an awakened one? And in Tibetan, the term Buddha was translated in an interesting way, because Buddha is the past participle of the verbal root Bud, meaning, so it means one who has awakened. In Tibetan, Sangye means dissipation, Sang, and expansion. So it's the dissipation of all factors of ignorance and dualism, and the expansion or unfoldment or blossoming of all capacities of realization. So Buddha is defined as a person or a state in which or in whom cognitive and affective obscurations have cleared, Sang, so that the inherent capacities for caring and knowing, Kensei Nuden, are fully able to manifest. And in this tradition, it's considered indispensable to have a realized person point out this Rigpa, partly because the condition of ignorance is such that there's a kind of inbuilt resistance to understanding it. And so there are various discussions of deviation points where you can mistake what you think is a valid experience with something that's just fleeting, ephemeral, not lasting. So the point of these instructions is to reveal within the flux of adventitious thoughts and sensations that characterize dualistic mind an invariant pre-representational structure of awareness that's, as I mentioned, known as primordial knowing, pure awareness, or mind as such, semni. And the goal then is to directly realize and become increasingly familiar with this originary mode of consciousness and not confuse it with any of the derivative and distortive aspects of Rigpa. Because in this scheme, the operations of dualistic mind come to be regarded as the expressive energy of Rigpa itself. And the thinking behind that is that as long as you regard dualistic thoughts or sort of random sensations as something to be relinquished or gotten rid of, it perpetuates a kind of an internal dualism between the meditator and the object of meditation. So the trend was increasingly to regard these thoughts, feelings, whatever rises, not as something objective or something external to the meditator, but rather as the expressive energy of pure awareness itself. So now I'll just look at how mind itself is understood, the nature of dualistic mind. So mind is an umbrella term for a complex variety of phenomena that Buddhism traditionally regards as sources of ignorance, error, confusion, affliction, and ultimately samsara itself. And the idea in this tradition is conceptual thinking is not just a source of samsara, but it is samsara. Samsara is simply dualistic thinking. Longchenpa, our 14th century synthesizer I mentioned, says that mind constitutes adventitious defilement. It functions as the fundamental cause of samsara. It depends on habitual tendencies of the three realms, desires, forms, and formlessness. As it creates the conditions of worldly life, it is that from which we should be emancipated. And he gives a further analysis of mind as comprising two aspects: an apprehended object-oriented mind, that engenders the intended objects of the five sensory capacities, and an apprehending subject-oriented mind that, under the distorting influence of karma and its habitual tendencies, leads to the sense of an independently existing self as the owner of these states. Longchenpa again says, samsara, which consists in grasping an object where there is no object and grasping a mind where there is no mind, appears before beings like a dream, having its inception in the manifesting of aspects of subject-oriented and object-oriented mind. So mind here is really seen as both having a subjectivizing function and an objectifying function, and both co-arise. On the other hand, the nature of primordial knowing, which in Dzogchen, a lot of the presentation of mind is simply a rehash of very old Buddhist Abhidharma and Yogacara ideas of the so-called mind and the 52 mental factors. But when you come to discussion of primordial knowing, you get really indigenous contributions made by Tibetan Dzogchen masters. In this scheme, it's said, these are quotes from, I'm using almost extensively primary sources in this talk, partly because I just didn't want to mix it with contemporary interpretations, and also because frankly, there just isn't a lot of Dzogchen still, there's still a lot of untranslated material. So in one of Longchenpa's works, he says, the essence of primordial knowing is that it's ever present as the factor of knowing that's personally realized, that is personally realized primordial knowing. And then he focuses on what's called the Dredon, the etymology. It's the realization and awareness, that's the she part of Yeshe, of that mode of being which has been present primordially, yene. And the prefix ye is really interesting because I'm translating it as primordial, but when you look in the sort of old lexicons, how this term is understood, it really doesn't mean genetically more primitive or historically prior, but it means something that's, ye means original, abiding, and certain. So it has this sense of something that's ever present in this moment right now as a deeper, I guess, structure of awareness. And it has three modes. Essence is originally pure emptiness. Emptiness meaning that all phenomena in the universe have no inherent existence or essence. So it's devoid of essence, devoid of substance and qualities, but its nature is spontaneously present clarity or radiance. So it's the making room for all appearance. And the third, and in some ways most interesting mode of primordial knowing is compassion or compassionate responsiveness. It's the unimpeded, pervasive, unceasing, altruistic part of awareness. So in this understanding, compassion, when you distinguish it from more voluntary or forms of compassion, it's actually something that's basic to human existence itself. And Longchenpa says, with the term mind as such, we refer not to dualistic mind. So here the ni particle, sem ni as opposed to sem, which is sort of like an abstract suffix. It means the mindness, which sounds terrible in English, so I haven't translated that way, refers not to dualistic mind, but to the very wellspring, pure awareness that is the vanishing point of mind. Some spiritually immature people who fail to distinguish between mind and mind as such say that they are one and the same. This is a cause of laughter. And this is kind of very typical of Longchenpa. He's often saying that this distinction between mind and mind as such is implicit in all of Buddhism, but wasn't often properly distinguished. 10? Okay. So 5. Okay, pure awareness. So pure awareness is defined as empty, luminous, wakefulness, free of subject to object. Ignorance is a fundamental lack of recognition of pure awareness. And it has to do with how the ground pure awareness in its manifesting or self-manifesting leads to an inherent misrecognition. Well, first of all, a non-recognition of its own basic nature, but then a misrecognition of seeing things as other than they are. So it builds on the traditional understanding of two forms of ignorance. There's a basic non-recognition of reality, which is this innate ignorance, not seeing things as they are, which is compared to the eye not being able to see itself. Then there's the so-called reifying or conceptually proliferated ignorance, which is the ensuing misrecognition of reality, seeing things as other than they are, sort of like seeing a stippled rope as a snake or a scarecrow as a man. But the Dzogchen tradition introduced a third and more, what they considered more primal or fundamental form of ignorance, which is solipsizing ignorance, means the self being singled out. And this is where the sense of self as the owner and agent of experience first emerges. So although these are presented as three consecutive stages, they're actually occurring in real time. According to Dzogchen, it's just sort of a three-phase ongoing process. And the second two modes, innate ignorance and reifying ignorance, interestingly, are closely integrated with two understandings of what's known as personalistic false views in Indian epistemology. This is Satkaya Drishti, the idea of taking the psychophysical aggregates as a self. There's the innate personalistic views, the instinctive sense of self stemming from misidentifying the psychocorporeal aggregates as I and mine. These aggregates are things like form, feelings, sensation, conception, perception. Anyways, they all are misidentified as a self and as what the self owns. And this is shared by animals, it's said in the early Buddhist epistemological works. The second is the more familiar personalistic views that occur in different metaphysical systems, the idea of a lasting self, person, soul, spirit, life force, human being, or other nominalist ideas of selfhood. So I'm just going to jump, because time is short, to how pure awareness is disclosed. So pure awareness is considered to be universally available to beings, but it's not readily accessible because it's concealed behind a web of subjectivizing and reifying thought activities. And Longchenpa says, some ignorant people claim that when there's no mind, so this would be like the Chitta Nirodha state or Nirodha Samapatti, there's a state similar to being inanimate or in a stupor. But they have evidently learned little. He says, even in the absence of mind, since primordial knowing is present, it's not the case that open awareness also ceases. Moreover, through the cessation of ignorance, one's deluded mind, the sun of luminous primordial knowing, dawns, just as with the fading of night comes the dawning of day. So I don't need to give too many more quotations to that effect, because they are all kind of hinging on the same idea that if you see all thought as just being conceptual dualistic thought, then of course the cessation of thought would result in cognitive oblivion. So there is a need to recognize that there is a non-dual mode of awareness that would otherwise result in some sort of a dead end for the practitioner. So then I'll just jump to this final idea that we find in Longchenpa, where pure awareness is regarded as the ground of existence. And it's here that he invokes this famous parable of the 7 blind men and the elephant to illustrate the partial and perspectival nature of the 7 metaphysical grounds as distinct from the ground itself. And here the idea is that there are all different ways you can characterize Rigpa or pure awareness, and each of them may have some relevance, but the problem is if you take any one of them as being an absolute, then you end up with a dogmatic position. So Kepa Nibum in the 12th century specifies that the original or abiding ground is a matter of direct experience for adherents of the path, while the metaphysical grounds are one-sided abstractions advanced by adherents of philosophical systems. And they're based on realist ontologies that try to give different reductionist accounts of the way things are. Well, and I'll just, Longchenpa says the 6, or this should be 7 actually, the 7 grounds of metaphysicians are flawed because their proponents subscribe to views based on extreme belief stemming from their attachment to their own particular perspectives. They're like the interpretations of the color and shapes of a sacred elephant by 7 blind men based only on what they can grasp with their hands. And Kepa Nibum just adds to that none of these positions are inherently flawed, but they only become a problem or a source of error if you regard them as an absolute position. So here is just kind of I went into the different Dzogchen tantras and then some of the works that synthesize them. And these are basically the 7 metaphysical grounds to say that pure awareness is originally pure, to say that it's spontaneously present, to say that it's indeterminate, to say that it's an ultimate foundation, to say that it's something that's ontologically malleable, that it can be anything to anyone, or that it's amenable to any proposition, or finally that it's something heterogeneous and varied. So again, these can all be partially correct perspectives, but if they're taken as kind of an ultimate take on the pure awareness, they lead to error. So here we have the 7 blind men and the elephant, all describing different parts of the elephant and taking it to be a final definitive view. So the 7 metaphysical grounds are partial perspectives that are each held to be definitive accounts of primordial awareness. And finally, the nature of the primordial. Yeah, I'll wrap up right now. So the nature of primordial ground then, well, okay, what is it then if it's not these 7 different positions that different people have ascribed to it? It's defined as the inseparability of original purity and spontaneous presence, or emptiness and appearance. And this understanding is meant to avoid, on the one hand, a foundationalism, the idea that the ground is some sort of immutable, determinate entity, rendering all change, especially spiritual change, impossible. This is sort of what's known in Buddhism as the extreme of eternalism. But the other side is a complete relativism, the idea that the ground is inherently indeterminate, that it can be anything at all. And that's described as the extreme of nihilism. So the unity of emptiness and appearance avoids these extremes. So finally, I'm just going to really quickly say a couple things. I think that if we want to take Dzogchen philosophy seriously as a kind of offering us some sort of analysis of mind, we have to basically take seriously the primacy of first personal experience in understanding the nature, structure, and plasticity of phenomenality, and therefore of consciousness itself. So, and I think that, and this came up in discussion yesterday, that because a lot of this understanding of consciousness is based on a soteriological, ethical inquiry standpoint, it also opens up to investigation neglected areas of human experience, those sort of pre-reflective modes of thinking, feeling, and acting that are the focus of Buddhist path discourses, and that these may well lead us to rethink why we should be interested in investigating in consciousness in the first place. So thank you.